We might start the session. So I'd like to welcome you all to the session where we're discussing private sector development. My name is Christopher Russell and I have the honour to chair the session. Just a brief background, I'm with the Asian Development Bank. I'm a consultant under the Private Sector Development Initiative, which is a multi-year technical assistance that's now been going since 2007. It is co-financed by the Australian and New Zealand governments and is focused on private sector development throughout the Pacific. My particular area of interest is state and enterprise reform and governance. So we have 4 presenters here this morning. The session's been videoed, so they've asked if we can make sure that we talk into the microphones. So if you can stand up and still get close to the microphone, it's fine, but if not, the presentations will be undertaken while seated. I'm going to very briefly introduce the speakers. So we have Milne, who is the President of the Republic of Marshall Islands Chamber of Commerce, and Ellen will be talking to us. Ellen's been involved in a number of different things. She's currently working as a consultant with the Asian Development Bank, overseeing the Development Coordination Office in the RMI. Mr. Malcolm Bossley is Fiji Country Team Coordinator with the MDF, the Market Development Facility, and has been involved in that role for some time. Malcolm is part of the core leadership team that oversees the MDF multi-country facility and works directly with the Fiji country representative on the implementation of the Fiji country strategy. Anita, Jowitt is employer representative with the Vanuatu Tripartite Labour Advisory Council and a lecturer in law at the University of South Pacific and director of the Pacific Legal Information Institute. Emmanuel, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce your surname. Thank you, Iyabora. Thank you very much. Emmanuel is an accounting lecturer and PhD researcher at the University of Fiji and had previously held the following positions: Manager Accounts Information Technology of the Central Bank of Solomon Islands, Manager Finance of the Solomon Islands Airlines Limited, and Manager Finance of the Solomon Islands National Provident Fund. So I'm sure you will join with me in welcoming the speakers. And Ellen, first may I ask you to start?
Hello, that works. All right, I'll try doing this standing up. I think I'm short enough that I can do this rather than sitting down. Thank you, Christopher, for that introduction. My title for my presentation is Through the Looking Glass on RMI's Private Sector Development. So, folks, I know you're all full from lunch now, so get comfortable. Don't get up because you are definitely in the right session. Can I ask just real quick, is anybody familiar with this phrase, through the looking glass, just by show of hands? All right, great. I was counting on that. This is by a novel by Lewis Carroll. I think maybe if I say Alice in Wonderland, I might get more hands up. But basically, I thought I would take a bit of a chance, a risk, and take a different approach on my presentation today. For me, when I was asked to present on private sector development in RMI, this was the phrase that kind of jumped at me. And through the looking glass has different meanings to everybody in terms of, what does it mean things are not what they seem? Perhaps there's something more deeper that we need to look into. So I thought I would do that and also use it as an opportunity that we have to travel back in time to back in 2003 when the first private sector assessment was done for the Marshall Islands. So back in 2003, I wasn't there, so I'm trying to imagine what was the atmosphere back then. There was the decision there, or some of the attitudes or the feeling was that government announced that future growth depends on a thriving private sector and is interested in promoting private sector friendly policies within a sustainable development framework. Perhaps by some background, I would also need to add here that In 2003, it's about 10 years, a bit over 10 years since our second compact was signed. Our first compact, when it came with the U.S., it ended. There was a need to continue this support in terms of aid from our biggest development partner, the U.S. So, 10 years into now the second compact, where are we? Are we any closer to being sustainable? So, based on the private sector assessment, these are the factors that affect our private sector environment. So, right off the bat, we had a stagnant macroeconomy. The first 10 years of our compact, we see that we have declining growth of GDP annual growth of 20%. So basically, since the independence, our economy is just not sustaining or growing at all. In cases, we had some pretty big, significant declines in the GDP growth. Another factor affecting, based on the PSA 2003, was the low rate of return on capital. Private sector is a net exporter of capital. So as you can see, it's not a very conducive or positive environment for private sector. Other factors that are impacted are costly business environment. We have a Thai tax regime. And that back in 2003, we had poor infrastructure, and the cost of doing business is very expensive. So we've got concentrated economic power. This is where the state-owned enterprises are crowding out the private sector in terms of growth. So private sector is not able to compete with state-owned enterprises that are receiving substantial subsidies from the government and keeping the rates at a low rate that is not achievable in terms of cost recovery. We had undeveloped financial markets. Undeveloped financial markets, our land tenure is quite challenging, where you cannot use our land for collateral to access working capital. So in those cases, it's really the bigger boys, the larger corporations that have substantial assets that can access capital, working capital. In addition, the government had also established a development bank, but the problem with development bank is because these companies are high risk, they were not lending for development purposes, but ended up turning to consumer loans. So this is one of the challenges of private sector growth, was that small, medium enterprises do not have access to working capital in order to establish new businesses. This one's a big one for me, in my opinion. This is limited business and government consultation. Back in 2003, we've got separation between private and public. There's no consultation, and there's that need to harmonize private sector and public sector for a harmonized approach and policies. So this was the environment back in 2003. So some of the recommendations were policy initiatives, or public-private dialogue policies. This was policies that were promoting private sector growth by making it more competitive and changing some aspects of the role of the state and the economy. Institutional reforms were also highlighted as the recommendations in the private sector assessment 2003 that will promote private contracting and encourage financial market growth. So just some examples here, we've got SOE reform, tax reform, and land reform to make it more conducive for collateral for working capital. So overall, the conclusion of the private sector back in 2003 was that doing business in the RMI is difficult. However, the attitude, the mindset back then was that it was the time, that was the opportune time to address the role of the state, the role of business, and how reform should proceed. So now let's move to 2016. What progress has been made in this 10-year that, the motivation was high back in 2003 that we had to do something, reforms had to start. We needed to grow our economy through private sector development. So as you can see, in 2016, we had a updated private sector assessment that was just recently conducted in April 2016. It's still in its draft phases, so I've pulled in what I can to kind of give an idea, a synopsis of what is the situation we are in today? So basically, as you can see, the situation has relatively remained unchanged for 2004, and with aid unlikely to increase, sustainable future economic growth needs to be propelled by the private sector. So in 10 years' time, nothing has been done. We've been in planning and implementation has been very slow. So looking again at the stagnant macroeconomy, we had some growth, it's about 1.5%, but most of that was driven by the fisheries sectors and infrastructure projects through the compact funds for and the FAA, the airport expansion projects. Just to highlight some of what the most current private sector assessment identified, it indicated though that private sector's contribution, so on the upside, private sector's contribution to the economy has been growing at a faster pace than that of the public sector. This is really in line with what I just mentioned on the fisheries and the projects on the airport expansion. A positive note, as we reform legislation passed September 2015. Just a positive note, more challenges coming. I think we've reached that hurdle of recognizing that reform needs to happen. We passed the legislation, implementation is going to be another challenge ahead of us. We had the land registry that was established to address our land tenure challenges. I'd like to highlight here, however, that land registry is not a mandatory requirement, it's voluntary. So we still have quite a bit of work ahead of us in terms of land tenure. If you all had been part of the SOE reform session, I think the colleague from Kiribati had indicated land tenure is a very complicated issue. RMI is no different. There were some fiscal reform efforts during the 2008-2009 timeframe when the global crisis, in a sense, forced the country to really look at certain things in terms of their fiscal reform. So two groups or advisory groups were established, the Comprehensive Adjustment Program, looking to reduce the expenditures of the government, and the Tax Revenue and Modernization Commission, TRAM, looking at our tax regime, our revenue structure. So these are positive things that came out, that efforts were there, there are countries recognizing it, recommendations were made. However, the public sector continues to dominate the RMI economy. Even though there's some growth in private sector, in terms of employment, public sector beats out private sector. So they're poaching on talent because they're offering more income to the public sector, to employees. It makes it more attractive rather than the private sector. So we're losing out on those skill set and now forced to go to foreign workers to access those type of skills. However, there are also challenges in being able to get the foreign workers to come to the marshals based on barriers and processing bottlenecks. So as indicated, public sector employees are greater than private sector. And then tax reform, it has been drafted, introduced, but unfortunately it did not pass, and there will be a need to reintroduce it into legislation. I'd like to highlight, however, that government is looking into it, and myself, I've been approached by Minister of Finance indicating there is that renewed interest to really visit it and sit down with the private sector to discuss it further. This one I know left it for last to discuss, weak public-private engagement. I think that's very key. It was a problem back in 2003. It's still a problem in 2016. I've been in my role for about 1.5 years now, and these are some of the things that I'm working on to focus on improving that engagement. Reforms cannot move forward until we all come to a harmonized agreement, a shared common goal towards a much more sustainable and private sector growth. Recommendations for 2016, no surprises there. Implement SOE reform legislation, revitalize tax reform efforts, and then renewed efforts to strengthen land security to facilitate commercial development, supporting development bank as a source of capital for SMEs, and strengthening the public-private engagement. I think I'm about 3 minutes away, so let me just wind down. This is my last slide, and I think one of the things that the country needs to look at is that these challenges of tax issues, compact ending, where it's declining and set to expire in 2023. With now our biggest funding through development aid basically running out, the outlook looks grim. However, I think this is an opportune time for the country to look at these challenges, not as hurdles, but opportunities for us to, we couldn't make decision back in 2003. Time in this case, or lack of time, we know we're running out of time, is a positive thing. So I think it'll force us to make some tough decisions that have to be made. So I'd like to end my presentation on something from, we went from looking through the looking glass to navigating the private sector development. Now the Marshals, we pride ourselves as navigators of the Pacific. We have the navigating skills to go through uncharted waters in the big, bad Pacific Ocean. So to me, I think this is a very symbolic image here of our culture as we start navigating through the private sector development. And before we can do that, we need all hands on deck, public and private, for us to come together as one. And this was also discussed during the opening remarks this morning, and I thought it was great that it aligns exactly to what the outlook on private sector looks like. All hands on deck are needed as we navigate through the future on private sector development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for a very thought-provoking presentation. We're going to leave questions till after all of the 4 presentations have been complete. So if you do have some burning issues that you'd like to raise, I suggest that you take the note of them and save them until later. So our next presentation is from Malcolm. Hey Malcolm, you know to turn the microphone on? You want to go ahead? Yep.
And I think I'm just tall enough to be able to have to sit down for this one. I also can hide behind the screen in case anyone wants to throw any fruit at me. Top one. This one?
You can wait this one from
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see a few familiar faces. Today I'm going to talk very briefly about our experience, the MDF program, with introducing innovations through our private sector partnerships in Fiji. When we talk about innovation, I think a lot of us, with innovation, we often see the final product or the final service, and we often forget that there's a real person behind it and a business model. So I thought I'd start my presentation by just highlighting one of our partners, Takimai from Levuka, and to introduce you guys to Mr. Zane Yoshida, founder of Takimai. So Zane is from Levuka. I think his family in one of the oldest hotels in Fiji, the Royal. And Zane, about 8 years ago, decided that he wanted to turn his passion for kava into a business that could actually create jobs in Levuka. I think where the innovation came, Zane looked at a product like kava, which was, is common here, but he looked at developing a product that could actually have global appeal. And Zane has been working on this product for quite some time. He'll be the first to tell you that it's been a long and a hard journey. We've been working with Zane probably since our partnership started around 2012, and we were happy to say that by mid-2014, we were able to launch the Takimai brand, and also his factory in Levuka, and now he's sourcing all his kava locally in Fiji. Excuse me. Now, so who are we? We have a market development facility. We're an Australian-funded private sector development program. We are one of the first programs in the Pacific to actually use a market systems approach to the way we do business. And when I say market systems, we look at markets and the interaction the poor have with the markets. You know, as consumers, as employees, as sellers, and we realize that if we can make these markets work better, then that's a way that we can directly impact on the poor in the country. So I was this is a sort of picture a little bit like us. We're sort of going a little bit into uncharted waters. This model hasn't been trialed before in the Pacific, but I feel you know, we have been making steady progress, and I'll try and talk about some of the work that we're doing in the following slides. So where are we? We're now in 5 countries. We started in Fiji way back in, I think it was December of 2011, but now we're in PNG, Timor, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and PNG. So we're a multi-country program, and we have actually benefited a lot from cross-learning across the different country offices that we have. How we work? We are quite strategic in the way we select the sectors we work in. Basically, our bottom line is employment and changing incomes for the poor. So what we try to do is we first look for sectors of the economy that have growth potential, and then we try and assess whether those sectors have the ability to be more inclusive for the poor, and we then try and identify private sector partnerships that could potentially unlock constraints in those sectors to try and facilitate growth and to create jobs. Our portfolio in Fiji, these are the 3 sectors that we work in. We work in horticulture, tourism and export processing. We've had in excess of about 40 partnerships to date. All of these 3 sectors are sectors that we feel have the potential to create jobs, and that we know that the poor are engaged in a lot of different ways. Just a real quick snapshot of the different partnerships we have. So we have a number of partnerships across Fiji, both the main islands and even some of the smaller outer islands. Now, PSD challenges. I just thought I'd highlight this. Some of the key things, I think, for those that have been working in private sector development for some time is one of the big challenges is actually the perceptions about working with the private sector. I think that picture on the right kind of says it all. I think there's still a few people in the development space that still feel private sector development is a dirty word. Maybe because, you know, they think that everyone, you know, like my friend on the right, is sort of like a fat cat looking to make as much money with little understanding of the poor, or even wanting to help the poor. So that has always been a challenge. And most of the private sector programs that are out there, I think we have also struggled to be able to demonstrate credible results on impact. I think we've had a results focus for some time, and probably a lack of practical tools to really show how private sector development does impact on poverty. You know, at the moment we've got a range of different initiatives that look at private sector development. There's top-down initiatives looking at the business enabling environment, and you know, we have small initiatives, you know, working through NGOs or government that look at a lot of livelihood type projects going bottom up. I think the challenge really is that, and I think both are needed, is that you need to look at both or you don't see the complete picture. I think, you know, what we've seen in the past is these, you know, you've had initiatives where, like regulations, for example, SME finance, are designed but without understanding that most of the SMEs in the country are actually in the informal sector and do not qualify for SME finance. So, and on the flip side, you know, there's a lot of initiatives that look at livelihood projects for startup businesses, but with very little mentoring or advisory support available locally, which really makes it hard for these businesses to even go past the first year. So usually have a very high failure rate. Our work, and what I just want to stress really in this presentation is the importance of incorporating local context. I think for a long time, a lot of private sector development work that we've been doing has really looked at sort of a cut and paste model. I think we have to be realistic. What works in Asia and Africa will not necessarily work in the Pacific. We need to understand that we have, different cultures, different incentive schemes, and different norms in our communities that affect the way that we do business. And for us to actually do private sector development, we need to take those into consideration for us to be effective when we work with the private sector in these countries. One of the things that I like about innovation is that the innovation is a tool that allows us to work with the private sector to actually develop products and services that suit the local context, and to look at business models that actually leverage the strengths of communities and take advantage of new market opportunities. With the global environment and global markets, things are always changing at such a rapid pace. If you don't innovate, then you quickly get left behind. So I think what we're finding even now in Fiji is that there is interest now from the private sector to become more innovative, to look at new business models and to look at new products. Just quickly, just to highlight our approach. So one thing we do, we spend a lot of time trying to understand country context. So we have quite a substantive country and sector strategies. Where we can, we use as much secondary data as is available, but a lot of times when there's gaps, we do our own research to make sure that our strategies and our partnerships fit the local context and really look at taking advantage of the opportunities that exist within the markets. Yeah. We have quite a comprehensive M&E system. Our M&E system is not just a reporting system, it's a learning tool for our staff. Our M&E system allows us to really track our partnerships and see when they are going off track. So we use it extensively. It's a day-to-day thing for us. The system that we do use, it adheres to the Donor, Community and Enterprise Development, the standard, which is sort of the global best practice for private sector development monitoring. We also get audited by the DCED to check the quality of our monitoring systems, and we actually publish our results on an annual basis. So if anyone wants to check those, they're also on our website, which I'll put the link up a bit later. The partnerships and co-investment, I think in the past we've also seen a lot of the private sector development programs and the businesses in countries tailor their applications to fit, I guess, the development agenda or whatever is the new in thing. The way we work, our partnerships, we really look at these businesses as genuine partners that we co-invest with. That we're not a funding agency, we are a business partner. And the business plans and the business models of our partners actually become our models. So we work alongside, and just like any other business partner, as opposed to financial returns, our return, we look for development outcomes. So it's not, for us, it's not about return on investment for profit, it's return on investment for jobs, return on investment for increased sourcing, increased income flowing into the rural communities. And that's how we see all of our partnerships. But it's grounded in sort of a commercial reality, so that all our partnerships have to show sustainability and have to be able to show that they have a sense of commercial reality behind them. Lastly, I'll focus on supporting new and innovative business models. Because like I said, this is what we feel is possibly, we've had a lot of experience, we've been involved in a lot of firsts in Fiji, we've been fortunate to work alongside a lot of private sector partners. And I think the main takeaway was that there really is no standard template or guideline to trying to support innovation. Innovation really, if people have ideas, some are at the idea stage, others are trying to figure out a technical issue with production, while others are trying to figure out how they actually get this product to market. So, you know, supporting innovation is more about a flexible approach and really working alongside these businesses and these entrepreneurs to understand the problems and trying to unlock those constraints. I just wanted to very quickly highlight just some of the innovations that we've been fortunate enough to be involved in. So this is an innovation for business growth, Andi Chocolates, Fiji's first commercial chocolate manufacturer in Fiji. We started working with Andi a couple of years ago, and at that stage he was really sort of a micro producer. He's operating out of a small facility in, I think it was in Latoka. And we've helped him actually transition to a fully fledged factory that's now operating out of Denarau. Working with Tomo, who is the entrepreneur, was a challenge. I mean, Tomo had to transition out of being a one-man business to actually running a factory. So it was a lot of our support looked at business system strengthening, getting the right people into the business, looking at his backward linkages, how to effectively source quality cocoa. Once you got to scale, all of these things kind of multiplied and became much more of a challenge in terms of rolling out this business model. We have had quite a lot of success with him, but the thing that Tomo brings is now, you know, before cocoa in Fiji really was just a product that was grown locally but mostly just exported. Now cocoa farmers in Fiji actually have an alternate market, a very lucrative local market, which is feeding our tourism sector. So that's one of our partnerships with Andi Chocolates. Innovation in farmer productivity, Ag Lime, I don't know if many of you have heard of this, but this was actually one of the very first partnerships signed by MDF. In Fiji, soil acidity is a big problem, particularly in our sugar and our dalo industries. This has impacted on yields and the size of the crop. So agricultural lime, the solution has been around for a while, but there was no local solution when MDF started. When we started to look at potential partnerships, and Standard Concrete came up, and you know, a cement producer going into agricultural inputs, that's quite a big transition for them. And the innovation really came about how we showed them about market segmentation, about how to actually look at proper distribution channels, distribution networks, and really trying to get them to think like you've got this new market that is a totally different product. And that took a lot of time, but you know, we were able to work with them alongside them, and in 2014 we also were able to launch, 2012, we were able to launch AgLine, which is now 50% cheaper than the imported product, and now actually accessible for most farmers. We've really seen some really promising early results with up to, I think, 20 to 30% increase in yield for a lot of the sugarcane farmers where the product's been trialed. I'll just skip along very quickly. This is one of our new ones, Biotech, Fiji's first private tissue culture lab. So we've been talking about the need for tissue culture labs for quite some time. They traditionally were used for research, but in most big agricultural economies, tissue culture is a key ingredient for commercial agriculture. So being able to support Fiji's first commercial tissue culture lab for us, and really looking at some of the key technical issues around how to establish readily available supply of disease-free planting material to our farmers, we think has potential to have a huge impact in the economy here. This innovation, while you know it's still early days for us, but we feel, particularly with the recent cyclone Winston, something like this has the potential to really build the resilience of the agricultural sector in here, because we can quickly turn around and make available hundreds of thousands of plantlets for rehabilitation following natural disasters, and also try and get more consistency when we're doing our exports in Fiji. So just before I finish up, just some lessons learned. A lot of our partners are engaging with local communities, and one thing that we have realized is it is not easy. You know, sometimes price is not everything. Communities have their own cultures, norms, and sometimes it's about understanding when you're needed and when you're not, and respecting how these communities work. Distribution, we've seen with a lot of our partners, as something that was a little bit taken for granted that it would be easy, and I think we're realizing now that distribution and marketing really need specialist skills, and without that, a lot of entrepreneurs that try and do that part of the business model on their own have really struggled. And lastly, women's economic empowerment it's something that's sort of it's trending at the moment, but one thing we've really found with a lot of our partners is that you need to be able to establish the business case. You know, you can talk about it until you're blue in the face, but until you can show the business case, it doesn't really mean much. So a good example of that is we're working with Mark One Apparel right now on building a daycare center. Now, the reason Mark is interested in daycare centers is because he has got up to 25% of his female staff that go on maternity leave never return. So he sees the daycare center as a key strategy for staff retention, not as a nice to do, and he sees the business case for it. And we've been happy to work alongside him actually doing this, and I'm hoping that we'll have that ready probably in the next year or so. Lastly, finishing up, sorry. There is a lot of stuff and a lot of partnerships, case studies. We publish a lot of stuff. So if you have time, please check out our website. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, all the Instagram, all the usual social media stuff. And thank you very much for your time.
Malcolm, that's brilliant. Anita.
Okay, so today I'm talking about my experience in Vanuatu as an employer representative on the Vanuatu Tripartite Labour Advisory Council, which is a statutory body, so it's established by an Act of Parliament, and it aims to provide a forum for private sector and government and worker policy dialogue. I'm also an academic with the School of Law, so this presentation in some ways is straddling both the academic sides of some of the issues as well as experience. Starting off with the importance of policy dialogue for the private sector and why I actually thought about doing this presentation was at last year's opening plenary at the Pacific Update Conference. The Dean of the ADV Institute, when launching a report last year, Pacific Opportunities, said that reform priorities for enhancing Pacific links include maintaining political stability, but also ensuring stakeholder participation. So stakeholder participation is crucial. And Alan has just made the case from Marshall Islands why there needs to be private sector and government dialogue. I think we're all in agreement on that. A little bit of data as well from what the private sector in Vanuatu has said. So in 2014, there was a survey of over 450 businesses in Vanuatu, from solar right up north down to Tana and Aniwa on the south. Many of these have been written up in a report to the National Sustainable Development Plan Working Group. When it comes to the most important policy priorities for the private sector, what they said was good governance was right up there, along with health and education, and then environmental protection, and for VELA in particular, competitively priced infrastructure. And again, we can see private sector sees good governance, including both political stability and participation, is absolutely crucial. Also, just putting up quite interestingly what people said were the least important policy priorities. That maybe you'd think private sector would say should be number one, but actually private sector development and employment creation, primary sector development, even macroeconomic stability and equitable growth, these were seen as being lower down on the list. They were still important, so don't get me wrong, private sector aren't saying you don't need to do these, government, but was saying you need to get the basics right: health, education, and good governance. Also, on the data, so this is what the private sector in Vanuatu was saying at least a couple of years ago, was when it comes to problems for businesses, we'd ask them to rank a whole big list of things from, with the ranking of 1 being no problem at all for my business, to 3 being a major problem. When it came to the biggest problems for businesses in sort of 2014, political instability, high government taxes, fees and levies, and inconsistent government taxes, fees and levies, and inefficient service delivery was seen as being some of the biggest problems. And these are problems that arise, at least in part, due to lack of effective dialogue. And just wanted again to highlight what people said weren't really problems for businesses, and in particular the third on that list of limited access to finance. And also I was interested to see secure access to land was there as well. Last year at the Pacific Update we heard about how lack of access to finance is a serious hindrance for businesses, and both in the plenary today and in the last session I attended, we heard about the need for finance to increase capitalisation. And a bit of a tangent, but businesses in Vanuatu suggest maybe this isn't as much of an issue. So I think there's a whole conversation to be had there about the nature of finance and the needs and maybe the gaps between what small holders want in terms of their development paths and maybe what national development priorities are. Anyway, coming on to what Vanuatu has been doing to build better dialogue in terms of labour and employment policy. It starts off with the ILO approach, the International Labour Organisation tripartite approach to employment policy. So the three-legged stool where you've got government, workers and employers all joining together to develop employment policy. And we just heard from Malcolm about issues of cut and paste models. This absolutely is a cut and paste model. It's a global model that's been around for quite some time. It certainly has been gaining more traction in the Pacific recently. So in 2008, the International Labour Organisation had this Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalisation, and part of this declaration was pushing what they call the key governance conventions, one of which is Convention 144 on tripartite consultation. Now, this is particularly relevant for the Pacific because we can see that increasingly countries in the South Pacific region are joining the International Labour Organisation. So Fiji's been the longest standing member, and then Papua New Guinea, but most recently Tonga, Cook Islands, Palau have joined in the first decade past 2000. Kiribati, Vanuatu, Samoa, Marshall Islands, Tuvalu have joined. So it's becoming much more of a significant policy driver in terms of labour in the Pacific, maybe. When we look at how the ILO tripartite approach has been adopted in the Pacific, the first thing to look at is the decent work country programs. So these are the programs that are signed between the government, employers' organisations, workers' organisations and the ILO to set the agenda for sort of usually 3-year terms. One of the things that we have seen through the Decent Work Country programs is the desire to promote tripartite dialogue, and the obvious outcome of this has been more laws in the area. So this is either brand new tripartite dialogue structures or the updating of existing structures. So again there's a bit of a list. Kiribati, new laws in 2015, Samoa, new laws in 2013, Solomon Islands, labour rules 2012, and so on. Now, not all of these are new, and we can see there Papua New Guinea's Employment Relations Amendment Act, which introduced tripartite structures, 1991 through to 1998. So, if that's a bit of the context, what's happened in Vanuatu? Well, first of all, we can start with the legal evolution. So in 1983, 3 years after independence, Vanuatu passed its Employment Act, and part of the Employment Act established the Labour Advisory Board. So it was a tripartite body made up of 15 members, up to 15 members, 5 public servants, and an equal number of employer and worker representatives. It had very simply defined functions to provide advice on any matter affecting employment and labour relations, and it was to determine its own rules of procedure. Whilst it was a statutory body, it barely functioned most of the time, is I think fair to say. There are very few records of its functioning and its meetings. When it came to some major legal reforms in 2008 and 2009, the Labour Advisory Board simply wasn't involved at all. And so it was a pretty dysfunctional statutory body. So, what did Vanuatu do? With the help of the ILO, it established the Tripartite Labour Advisory Council in 2010. So it reformed the laws. And it didn't reform the laws very much. It was mainly about the membership and a more detailed statement of the objectives and functions. Now I've only got 5 minutes left. I've spent far too much time on the background. Getting into really the meat, has this been a success? Well, the press release from the ILO when it was launched on Labour Day in 2011 suggests that yes, it was. And it said for the first time since independence, government workers and employers have formally joined forces, which is a wee bit of a falsehood because 1983, they'd also done it, at least in law. But it was certainly seen as a very positive move. The issue, though, has been the gap between the ideal, a three-legged stool where everyone is equal players and they're resting on a stable base of political stability and also participatory democracy, to a reality where the legs aren't all equal and you don't have a stable base where participatory democracy is well established. Also, a bit of a tangent, there's this whole question of how informal or subsistence or non-unionised workers, which make up the vast part of our labour force, get represented. There are huge gaps between the concept and the practice. These gaps largely relate to very simple things about processes and meetings, so minute taking, advance notice of agendas and papers, which is vital for pre-meeting preparation and is also vital with consultations with constituencies to ensure that we're acting as representatives of employers or workers rather than acting as representatives of ourselves as individuals. There's also inequalities in the capacity of social partners. Whilst the ILO does work with the employer organisations and worker organisations to strengthen capacity, there's really quite big questions that keep getting raised about the government representatives. Are they there as employees or as policy advisors and representatives of government policy? We've also faced the problems of over-ambitious work programs where the very first thing TLAC tried to do was reform the employment relations, all of the employment laws into a massive consolidated employment relations bill. Huge, huge program that wasn't underpinned by any employment policy whatsoever and ran into problems. Also, big questions about determining policy agenda. So the Decent Work Country programs, are they driven by the ILO or are they driven by what the country wants itself? And do we as TLAC have the capacity to actually be trying to set the policy agenda? So we have meetings, we make suggestions, but then these never quite get carried forward into the written documents. As well, if the government members aren't playing their role as government policy advocates, advocating for what was the PAA and now will be the NSDP, how does government policy agenda get incorporated? And as well, there are questions about how TLAC and the Minister should be communicating. Should the Minister be setting TLAC's agenda, or should TLAC be acting more proactively and taking things up to the Minister? Now, when it comes to narrowing the gap, of course, there are legal fixes. So there are laws in Samoa and other countries as well that can deal with issues about meetings not being held, and laws in Papua New Guinea about notice of meetings, what the effect of the recommendations would be, and how to manage a secretariat. But I would suggest in 2010 we already tried a legal fix. It didn't work too well. Instead, what is needed is the practical fixes. And ILO's already building organisation capacity, but there's a difference between organisational capacity and culture. So what is the culture around meetings? What is the organisational culture around acting in a representative manner? And these are actually really big questions and really quite deep questions that don't only affect the operation of TLAC, they affect the operation of every single government committee where you've got private sector and government interacting. And there's also the question, and this is the very last point, since I'm over time, when I was speaking with the Commissioner of Labour last week on the question of how government capacity is being addressed. So how can we get government to act better as policy representatives? And as well, how can we provide secretariat support? Part of this is about resource issues, but it's also, again, about building that organisational culture, which is a much more difficult, much bigger, much deeper question. Moving forward, as an academic, I certainly think there's real space for comparative study of the operation of these new tripartite labour bodies across the Pacific. Which ones are working, which ones aren't, and what are the conditions that make them work in different ways in different countries. But also, quite practically for Vanuatu, what can we do to develop organisational culture? And they're leaving questions. Is there a role for PICPA, the Pacific Island Centre for Public Administration? And as well, is there a role for the ADB with building technical capacity in this area? So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Our final presentation this afternoon is from Emmanuel. So, the seat is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm fortunate to be the last speaker, so I can pick this and that from the previous speakers. So, this presentation is part of my research as well. So I'm glad and happy to actually share it with you, especially for the donors for the government. Managing Wantok system influence, and that's actually improved the business climate in Somaliland. Now, it can be said in a different way in your culture, but major Melanesia countries are Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu and Somaliland. So we use the Wantok system like a notebook. So I'll be talking very, very quickly on that, and then we'll have a round of discussions. Now, when we run a business, in fact, we would like to see success in every business that we operate, whether it's an NGO or whether it's in the public sector or enterprise or whether it's in the private sector. And we would like to see what's going to be the outcome of that. Now, there are factors that are influencing the success of a business. Now, prior to discussing that, I would like to reflect on one of the statements made by one of our renowned statesmen, Sir Paul, the chairman of the National Peace Council. That was in 2012. And I was saying that Solomon Islands is starting to confront the damage imposed by the Wantok system. Now, when we look at this statement, that shows the depth of what the issue is. So I will take us to at the end to conclude the statement that he made. So during my presentation, I would just like us to remember that. So now that's my coverage. So it's like more limit, and most of the data that I've collected is on the ground. So what we'll be hearing today, what is different from what you're getting, official meetings up in offices. So I'll share some of the findings that I have also in the discussions today. So we'll look at the system, basically briefly for those of us who don't know about Wantok system. I'll just go through it very, very quickly. The obstacles that were identified by the World Bank studies, the extent of the system that influenced into different sectors, and then we'll look at the results and findings and ways and measures we can actually manage that. Okay, and then I'll conclude by summary. Well, of course, if you run a business, then you know, and I know, that there's an internal environment, there's an external environment, and that just summarizes that outside of the business environment, you have the external macro environment, micro environment, and of course, if you go further, you can see the laws, policies, economy, technology, social values, and we've touched base on that during the previous presentations, the cultures in the Pacific Island. So I'll be focusing more on that because it's more challenging if we have to look into the Melanesian countries like Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. Like I said earlier on in the introduction, that you can call it another name, Pacific Island country, maybe in Samoa or Fiji, Karakura system. But I'll be focusing more on the Wantok system in this presentation. Well, the problem, the downfall of many small businesses and medium-sized businesses, they say it's Wantok system, and therefore we might ask ourselves, well, what is Wantok system, and how does it affect the business environment or business climate, and to what extent it has affected, and then what can be done. Okay? After the poll that has been made, by the statesman, what can be done? I think this is one of the moves to actually respond to the poll by Sir Paul. So the aim of the paper is to explore how to manage Wantok system influence, that is in order to improve the business climate in Solomon Islands. And I will recommend some of the measures that we've taken. That's basically, for us, those who don't know about Wantok system, it's more like relationships that between local settings, customs, and as you move further a bit, you have religious identities, languages, and then of course, when you move a little bit further on, provincial identities, and you have big man hierarchy, political corruption, more distant Wantok, so it's a network. When you go out of the country, then you have Melanesian Wantok, where you see Papua New Guineans, Vanuatu, you will see that happening. Now, what I would like to stress in here is that if you look at that, it says the mutual reciprocity. That is one thing that I would like to focus on when we go through the presentation. Now, traditionally, it's supposed to build strong relationships in family, tribe, and clan. We will see later on how it has been weakened. Now, in literature, it's giving us the advantages and disadvantages. The benefit of that is sharing and caring. In the rural setting, in villages, where there's no social security, people share and care. Even the extended family, they'll be looking after, the families. Whereas in the Western world, you can go to people's home, you can be there, look after them there. In the setting of a traditional setting, you'll see that that's the benefit of that. And the essence of that is to actually provide foundation for the relationships, build up relationships between people to people. Now, the disadvantage of that in the literature is, the misuse of the system, personal gains. And we can see that one of the things that came out very, very clearly is the bribery and also its misuse and corruption. That would be used as a political seal. And then for business development, its impediments. And one of the research we found out that the Wantok system has been misusing that. So revenues can go towards the Wantoks. It's not towards building the business. So we can see that has been misused. Now, I'll also just run past very quickly the research or survey that was done by the World Bank. Some of the obstacles that were faced by the businesses in Solomon Islands. The simple test that we can look at is if one system is misused, we will expect corruption to be very high. We've seen that in the disadvantage in the previous slide. And lo and behold, you can see that it's the highest in there, corruption, and the survey, and the tax rates. But I'll be focusing more on the first one. Okay. Just giving us an example from the data, you can see that the bribery incidences, you can see that it's 43.8% compared to East Asia and Pacific altogether, where it's 84.7, all countries 17.8. So you can see it's very high. Bribery percentage of public transactions where gift or informal payment Western, you can see that it's 27.4. Percentage of firms expected to give gifts to secure government contracts, you can see that it's 45.4, not high. And how about the percentage of firms expected to give gifts to public officials to get things done? 81.9%, quite high. So you can see that that is what is happening in the ground, the data, and this survey has been done between September 2015 and May this year. So we can see it's quite high in that. So what extent that the Wantok system influence? Well, looking at the chart or the diagram up there, it's cutting across all sectors. Civil society, private sector, public sector. So we can see that it's very pervasive right through the external and internal business environment. Now, these are the results that I found out when I went and did the survey. Well, traditionally, it's one person leading the tribe, or in some cultures, it's a group making decisions. It's a social security system based, that's traditional. Where if you look into the villages, you don't need a police post or you don't need any medical, because the community themselves look after themselves. So that's an example of the traditional system. Everything is achieved by consensus. It's community-based, and there are different levels of the system. Now, the inclusion of monetary, that is one of the factors that actually changed that and therefore weakens the social structure that used to be, building the strong relationship. Okay? So when the money comes in, it actually breaks down that strength of the relationship that used to be, that should be built upon. So we can see that people talking about self-reliance, achieve money talks, all these things are happening these days in the communities. Okay, so this is a challenge that people don't get away from that. So that's just showing us, from the business level, you can see that if you run a business, I'm just going through very, very quickly, you'll expect that it's not only you that will be managing it, there'll be the relatives, extended friends, they'll be coming to you, and of course you don't have, surplus of profit. What can you do? Borrow, reborrow, or use funds? Well, if nothing comes through, then corruption comes in. So that will be one of the things that we're looking at. Large organizations, you can also see that it has been used. Managers, when they make decisions, their nephews are in the company or the business or organization, they even don't perform, they still maintain them in there. Or how about in the larger sphere, the society, you can see also that it filters right through. For example, even the Prime Minister spends a lot of time just trying to keep the team together, because you see that it's hard, because the repercussion that will come from the decision that we make, it'll have a social impact on it. Another issue that comes on the economic situation, apart from that, another factor that actually contributes to the corruption that would actually help the evolution of traditional Wantok system to what I call monetarized Wantok system. So that's an example in here. This person working in the office, if you take them through the trainings, transparency, and accountability, I can guarantee you that they'll take 100% correct. When they move out of the office, it's quite different. Okay? So those people who got 100% out of the exam, when they move out, they'll have to look for something to feed their families. For example, Mr. X needs 2,000 per fortnight to feed his family, his extended family members, and he earns $700. Where does he get the other 1,300? If nothing else, no borrowings, any corruption. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, he and his family have to survive. So that's the whole thing that he has to look at. So when he's in office, he's on his side. When he's out there, he's the other side. So that's a challenge. So what should be done here? Okay, so we have some measures that can be taken. The government can actually look at setting a national strategy, a policy, to actually manage the Wantok system practices. Okay? At the moment, there's none. If it's mentioned in the constitution of the country that they have respect to the cultures and traditions, why don't they have this? Because if there's a system, there are processes that can actually be also implemented. Now, for business environment, the government has to address the obstacles that are faced by the businesses: corruption, tax, informal sectors, etc. For the businesses, they have to include Wantok system policies in the company organizations or policies. And for the fourth one, the economic situations, of course, control of prices, strengthen Somaliland's dollar, increase take-home pay, salary increase, and all these things. So these are some of the considerations that can help. So finally, that's the summary of that. So Wantok system, I put in the bracket in there that monetarized. It's not traditional Wantok system. It's a monetarized Wantok system that actually affects Solomon Islands. And if we implement all these, the government takes into this account, then it will help to move the business environment in Solomon Islands more conducive for investment. And we can see success stories that are coming out of there. Maybe I just finish with two quotes. One of the person that I was talking to, he said, "We cannot marry the two systems, the business and Wantok system. That cannot go together." Now, if we cannot marry them, then of course we can manage them. So that's one. And then the first one that Sir Paul was talking about, he was saying, Solomon Islands is starting to confront the damage imposed by the Wantok system. No, he went on further in saying that Wantok system is inconsistent with democracy. We will never practice democracy until we address Wantok system. Okay? So this is one of the moves that I've taken this forward to actually, encourage the academics, the donors, or the government to actually look into, this system to try and actually help the business environment, not only in the Solomon Islands, but also in other countries as well. Thank you so much.
So we have a few moments for question time. So does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? If you do, we would ask you to come or use the speaker on the front of you, or if you're sitting in the back, come to a speaker to talk to the speaker so the question can be recorded and answered. Any questions? Sir.
Hi, just had a question for James, Emmanuel, very sorry. We, as part of market development facility, we work in PNG, where Wantok system, both in urban settings and rural settings, are quite prominent measures or factors in the environment. And slightly differently, it's also the same in Fiji. So I was wondering if there are any examples or successful examples of companies, so let's say large plantations or otherwise, or large companies to work with the Wantok system to organize the supply chain, particularly because Wantoks already have some sort of organization to start with.
Yeah, thank you. I think my research is actually the beginning of what actually unfold over the years to deal with Wantok system. But we would like to see that if you have some policy guidelines, drawn up in the company policies, the recruitments. If there are reciprocal gifts, there has to be declared, transparency, so all that. It needs to be, documented into the law, so that it's an enabling environment for the businesses. So yes, so that can be considered.
Thank you. Sir.
Can you hear me? This is for Ellen. I'm just wondering, given the problems of economic development in FSM and Marshalls, and you're talking about, of course, private sector development, I'm wondering if you can give us a few examples of the potential beyond the mom and pop stores and the kinds of private sector that's basically supporting the government people when they're not there. And what kind of things are going to be possible in this environment?
Thank you. Great question, and one that I know I even struggle myself with. We look at our tourism. The potential for tourism is there, but then there's challenges that go with the tourism because of the high cost of transport. There's that cost benefit on whether, is Marshalls the tourism destination, or other areas like Fiji or Palau, which has access to the Asian markets. We in the North Pacific are right there stuck in the middle, where we're also, we've got a monopoly on transport, so it's quite costly in tourism. But the potential then, it's not just tourism. Then it's more on niche tourism, really focusing on our areas in terms of the World War II destinations of submarines, scuba diving. We've got our bikini atolls. So we also have, there's also a new initiative with our private sector with surfing industry. So we do have a very small scale but high-end tourism, with the Marshalls as being a destination with surfing and water sports industry. So the potential is there, but it has to be in niche markets. In terms of agriculture, we don't have things like Fiji has, or the bigger Pacific Islands in terms of our agriculture with sugar, because our islands, we don't have land mass at all. So the only product that we really are producing right now is copra. So there is the potential there, but it is again, we have to diversify our portfolio for copra to go into now niche markets of virgin coconut oil, looking more into the cosmetic industry. So just real quickly, I think those are the areas that are potential in terms of private sector development. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Hi there. My question's for Malcolm and the MDF team. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Tim Martin from FAO. I just wanted to give you a chance to maybe talk about how you identify the beneficiary businesses. You talked a lot about the particular model that you guys use to do a lot of analysis, and a lot of the resources go into doing analysis. Is it a process where you do an expression of interest and then you do that, or are you guys sort of always looking for the next business? And then I just thought maybe you could talk about how you ensure your investments are pro-poor. You know, you're helping your businesses adapt sort of pro-poor business model. I think that's part of it. And how you sort of establish thresholds. You know, you were saying that it's hard to have a sort of a cookie cutter approach where you drop something in from another region. And I know with MDF that was part of the initial teething problems, was something from Bangladesh and plonking it in Fiji and seeing if it'll go well, and needing to adapt that. But how have you guys gone about sort of doing that to sort of show that your investments are sort of, you know, getting a certain amount of smallholder benefits, and so on and so forth?
Thanks. For us, I think, how do we identify potential partners? It's a bit of a mix. When we do our sector strategies, we end up consulting quite widely. So it's always interesting to hear, you know, people have ideas about problems in the sector and their possible solutions. So we usually get an initial sort of list from our initial sector strategy. But then we also, as we develop the strategy and look at the constraint areas, we kind of analyze the players in the players in the sector, and we start doing more follow-up. Ultimately, we want to look at people that have a similar logic to us, like they're identifying a similar constraint, and then we can work together on actually looking at a business solution. So, yeah, like I said, there's no set way of identifying which businesses. We're quite active, we're in the field quite a bit, so a lot of them, some are via referral, but a lot more of the time it's through just everyday meeting with the private sector partners and going to different locations. In terms of identifying if it's pro-poor, when we look at business models, obviously, like I said, we have our results measurement actually allows us to track. We build in results chains that allow us to track all the way down to the farmer level. So we spend a lot of our resources, a lot of our business analysts spend a lot of time in the field, not just with the partner, but actually with the suppliers. We look along the value chain all the time, and we do baselines before the intervention, during the intervention, after the intervention. So we have got quite a rigorous M&E system that is able to give us quite a clear idea of, are we able to change people's incomes, or are we able to create new jobs?
Just as a very quick follow-up, would you be able to estimate, or has there been any estimate on what the sort of the share of the annual expenditure goes into sort of the analysis and the administration in MDF? I know that's been one of the criticisms of these kinds of programs in other regions, and I know the Enterprise Challenge Fund had those sort of issues around how much is, because it is so resource intensive to do this work in Pacific, there isn't the data, there isn't the information available publicly, and having to generate it yourself is...
So I'll just jump in. Well, usually our results measurement system, so that's where that resource that Malcolm was talking about, that goes into doing our poverty analysis, etc. Just very quickly, I mean, we do use leverage on a lot of tools that is already out there, like the Progress Out of Poverty Index and such, which allows you to do some quick screening for whether the benefits are pro-poor or not. But in terms of our resourcing, we would say about 10% of the amount that goes towards investments into these partnerships. That's what we would hold as our results measurement kind of resourcing. Now, it does vary a little bit. At the start of the program, we do have a lot of these resources go towards, also let's say 10% of that, of that amount, a lot of that would go into sector assessments or doing particular like primary research. In the middle, we might see a lull where we are going into an implementation phase where we are spending a lot more on actually going out and managing these partnerships and managing implementation, etc. Like right now, when we're ending we're at the end of our first phase, so let's say we're on the 5th year. We again see a climb in how much money or how much resources we're spending from the program. towards now measuring, doing impact evaluations, and et cetera. So I would say about 10%, maybe if we are doing bigger studies, we could go see a little bit more, but we would say about 10% of our activity money that goes towards the partners.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question's for Anita. So you said about doing some comparative research about the operation of tripartite structures across the Pacific, which I think would be very interesting. And I'd like to know, obviously, without this research project actually existing yet, what are your initial thoughts about the sorts of criteria or the indicators that you might be looking at to indicate the extent to which they are or are not succeeding in improving policy dialogue and development?
I think looking at some quite simple measures to start off with. So the frequency of meetings, the lead time into meetings, so how much time people have, do they get the papers in advance, the amount of consultation that the people on that committee do with their constituents, so is there actually any scope for that at all? They're quite simple measures. Are there minutes being produced? Are there action points being produced? Is there a consistent work program? Simple measures based on the Vanuatu experience. So we have meetings, we make decisions, we produce papers. A year down the track, we are revisiting exactly the same issues. So it does get somewhat frustrating. It absolutely would be possible to develop more complex measures, but output-based measures. But the experience in Vanuatu suggests that there's serious process issues. So I'd focus on the process measures first.
Thank you. Any further questions? Probably have time for probably one more. No? Okay, well then I will wrap up the session. I'd just like to thank the four presenters. I thought that the presentations were all of very high quality. I'd like to acknowledge the time and effort that they put in to their presentations. I think it's always a measure of how good the presentations are by how many and how good the questions are. So based on that, I think the audience here has given you all a resounding vote of success and thanks. Thank you very much indeed.